Hey guys, welcome to Men We Reaped by Jesmyn Ward. Our lesson objective for this lesson is students will be able to situate men we reaped in space and time. The question I want you to have in your mind as you're watching the video, who is Jesmyn Ward and what is her book Men We Reaped about? Let me tell you about the plan that we have for the next 2 units because this is important in order to, I think, for you to attack this first unit in the way I want you to attack it. We are going to be reading 2 works and comparing and contrasting them. All right, the first one is Men We Reaped by Jesmyn Ward. So Unit 6 focuses on this book alone. Unit 7, though, is about this book, Out There Screaming, which is a collection of short stories. They're horror short stories written by Black authors. So we'll be comparing and contrasting these 2 works at the end of Unit 7. They have a lot in common, and yet they're a lot different. I haven't taught Out There Screaming before, so this is my first year teaching it, so I'm looking forward to doing that. There are some central themes in both works that are that you'll see, and so we'll trace these as we read Men We Reaped. And then we'll look for them again when we read the short stories in Out There Screaming. The first one is Coming of Age in the Margins, or Recentering Marginalized Voices. So coming of age is simply growing up, moving from innocence to experience, the process of maturing and forming one's identity. In the margin is pushed to the periphery or left out of mainstream narratives. So the literal margin on a page is this blank space, right? And so figuratively, it's pushed out of the center. And those in marginalized communities live in a world that often overlooks or dismisses them. Marginalized voices refers to those who have been historically silenced or excluded. And so both works deal with that theme. The next theme is narrative as a quest for freedom and understanding. So narrative is storytelling, quest, journey for freedom and understanding. Storytelling is a way to become free or to free oneself from something. In the case of Men We Reaped, Ward tells us in her first chapter that she's writing the book in order to make sense of traumatic experiences that happen to her and figure out why they happen to her. Identity as choice is the third theme that we're going to be looking at. And this is the idea that individuals have the agency and power to define and assert their own identities, despite the constraints of societal stereotypes, racial prejudices, and historical oppression. So watch how Ward describes the people in her book and when they are resisting stereotypes and labels. And then you'll know we're talking about this theme, identity as choice. Okay, so the themes pop up for Men We Reaped, of course, and then they will pop up again for the short stories that we read in Unit 7. And here's how those units are going to play out. The first unit, Men We Reaped, does not have an end of the unit essay, summative assessment. Instead, it's a whole class discussion. So we are going to be discoing as a whole class a lot for this book. And by the end, you'll have that end of the unit summative assessment as a whole class discussion. And I'll explain how that will work as we get closer to it. You do have to write about the book, however. It's just that you're not going to write about it until the end of Unit 7. So after Unit 6, we're going to read the short stories in the collection Out There Screaming. And when we get to the end of that unit, that's when you'll be writing about both texts, Men We Reaped and Out There Screaming, in a compare-contrast essay. Okay? So that's the large view of what is coming up. Let's talk a little bit about where we are in terms of literary genre. This class is designed to introduce you to the four main literary genres or forms of literature. The first is poetry, and we spent the beginning of the semester focused on poetry. The second main literary genre is prose nonfiction. So prose meaning not poetry, nonfiction, not fiction. Real stories, things that happened. The third genre, prose fiction. So short stories that we read in Unit 7 will fit in this genre, as well as the 2 books that we read in the first semester. The fourth literary genre is drama or theater. And of course, we started the year with this genre by reading Medea by Euripides. Right now, we are situated in prose nonfiction. So prose nonfiction could include things like newspaper articles or speeches, but also they can include it. Also, it includes memoir, autobiographical writing. So let's talk a little bit more about memoir. What is a memoir exactly? I've got a definition here for you. It's a narrative written from the perspective of the author about an important part of their life. And so it's not quite the same as an autobiography, although it is autobiographical, because an autobiography is about the whole life, right? Not just a part of the life. There's also an aspect of memoir that's a little bit different than autobiographies, loosened facts. The author's feelings and assumptions are central to the narrative in a memoir. Memoirs still include all the facts of the event, but the author has more flexibility here because she's telling a story as she remembers it, not as others can prove or disprove it. The facts about the things that happen in the book are true, but things like the dialogue or, what somebody was wearing, those kinds of things can't be exactly true, right? Unless you had like a recorder videoing the whole thing, which doesn't happen, right? And so, who said exactly what and exactly when is loosened a little bit. Ward recreates the events as she remembers them, giving the reader the feelings that she had as she lived them. Unlike most memoirs, though, Ward does give us a lot of factual information. She, towards the very end of the book, brings up statistics that she has found, and she includes some nonfiction articles, or at least references these nonfiction articles, and so maybe goes beyond the boundaries of a typical memoir in that way. She also includes the facts of the central event. The central event that Ward focuses on in this memoir are the violent deaths of 5 young men close to her in the span of only 4 years. That is really the limited span and focus of this book. So while an autobiography might span an author's entire life, this memoir focuses on those 4 years. Ward does explain, though, in the first chapter of the book, the prologue, that in order for her to tell the story, she does have to include her own experience growing up and the experience of other people in the town where she grew up, this small town of DeLisle, Mississippi. So she'll include a lot of background, and then she'll, not just of like her experiences as a child, but even her parents and grandparents, and then even further back, ancestors of this particular area of the world. So it's limited in span and focus, but maybe atypical for a memoir. She does give us a lot of background information, especially in the first couple of chapters. Okay, so I wanted to just situate it for you in terms of genre and conventions of the genre, and how her book is a little bit different than some of the typical conventions of the memoir. Let me tell you a little bit more about Jesmyn Ward herself. I was lucky enough to meet her in 2023, so I have to put this picture up. I showed her a copy of the book that I've been teaching and had her sign it and dedicate it to you guys. And I told her all about Cooper and how much I love my job and working with you guys. And we had a great little, very brief chat. There's a long line. But it was really special to be able to tell her about Cooper and how wonderful you geniuses are. So she signed my book, and make sure you see that signature at some point during the unit. She is not just one of my heroines, but she's a very well-respected author, and part of it has to do with the awards that she has won. She is the only woman to have won the National Book Award twice. She's the only African-American writer to have won the National Book Award twice. She won it first in 2011 for her book about Katrina. It's a novel called Salvage the Bones. And then she won it again in 2017 for her novel Sing Unburied Sing. And she'd only written 3 books. The one in the middle was the one we're reading, Men We Reaped, in 2013. So she's a very highly acclaimed author and has won all kinds of other awards. She's on every prescribed reading list that is out there. And she continues to write novels. Her most recent was Let Us Descend in 2023, which has won her all kinds of other awards. So she's highly acclaimed. And but we're focusing on Men We Reaped, the memoir, the nonfiction, about the 5 young men from her hometown, DeLille. It tells the tragic stories of their deaths. All were residents of the small town of DeLille, and all died violent deaths, including her beloved younger brother. And this is the book that, it's the story, she says, that turned her into a writer. She couldn't write the book until 2013, after she was already published. But she says that it's because of her experiencing these deaths that she decided she had to become a writer. She had to voice these stories that were all around her, but that were, for some reason, silenced. She also, says that of the 5 men who died, the underlying cause of their deaths was a self-destructive spiral born of hopelessness. And so she investigates that hopelessness and how it manifested itself in her hometown and in the people who she knew and loved in the book. Where is DeLille? DeLille is a rural town in Mississippi on the Gulf of Mexico. It's inland a bit, not quite on the coast, but close enough to the coast that it was decimated when Hurricane Katrina came through in 2005, and then also in other previous hurricanes, it was affected as well. So here we are. Jesmyn Ward actually still lives in this area. She lives in DeLille to this day. She is a professor at Tulane University in New Orleans. And so to get there, she has to drive about 40 minutes. She'll also talk about in her book, she'll talk about New Orleans in the prologue and how her father lived there. And so it's very close to New Orleans, but New Orleans is the big city, whereas DeLille is the small rural town where everybody knows everybody else. And we'll hear about how important this town is in her life. She was born there and, of course, lives there now. Her mother was born there. Her father was born there. Her grandmothers and grandfathers were born there, ancestors even before that. So she has a lot of history in this town and a lot of sad history, a lot of trauma and tragedy and violence, and yet she still lives there now. So that's really central to understanding this book, is understanding the sort of the good and the bad of DeLisle, the hometown of Jesmyn Ward. All right, how about the title? The title, Men We Reaped, comes from this quote from Harriet Tubman. We saw the lightning, and that was the guns, and then we heard the thunder, and that was the big guns, and then we heard the rain falling, and that was the blood falling, and when we came to get in the crops, it was dead men that we reaped. So the book's title comes from a Harriet Tubman quote, and this is after the all-black 54th Massachusetts Volunteer Infantry Regiment led a failed Union assault on Battery Wagner, a Confederate earthwork fortification on Morris Island on July 18th, 1863. This was one of the first major actions in which African American soldiers fought for the Union in the American Civil War. The courage of the soldiers in the 54th convinced many politicians and Army officers of their value, prompting the further enlistment of Black soldiers. But it was a failed battle, and many soldiers died. Harriet Tubman compares them to crops. But of course, instead of reaping crops, harvesting crops that would be used in a positive way, they're bringing in the fallen soldiers who will just be buried. So wanted to let you know that that's where the title came from, and want you to think about the connections there as you're reading. There's also an epigraph at the very beginning of the book that credits Harriet Tubman with a quote. So you will be able to go back to that and take a look at that as well. All right, so we'll be talking more in class about the book and kind of preparing you for reading it. I've included some trigger warnings in the packet. There are some tough things, you guys, that we're going to be talking about with this book. I am reminded this time of the year of this quote from James Baldwin, that not everything that is faced can be changed, but nothing can be changed until it is faced. I don't know about you guys, but I think we still have some problems in our world, and I think we do have to face them. And I want us to be courageous about how we look at our world so that we can make it a better place. And so we're going to do that in here in this unit. We're going to be courageous. We're going to tackle the tough stuff. And I'm going to give us some protocol that's going to help us in class be able to discuss some tough things together. Okay? Welcome to this unit, and thanks for listening.